Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. And the Ukrainian state is falling apart. The state apparatus, now commanded by the Kiev fascist clique, is losing control of their own military forces. As we've found over the past several weeks, nobody wants to go into harm's way for the sake of Turchinov, Yatsenyuk, Yarosh, and Tyanibok. And the latest proof we have is the occupation now since Sunday. Pro-Russian forces, starting on April 6th, pro-Russian forces have seized control of government buildings, first in Kharkov, then in the nearby cities of Donetsk and in Lugansk. And there's some action going on in Nikolaev, I think it's called. The Kharkov group has been ejected, but the Donetsk one is fortified, I think, more substantially. At a certain point, somebody there in Kiev, some member of the Kiev fascist clique, be it Turchinov or Yatsenyuk, gave the order to attack, and that was specifically the Alpha group of the Ukrainian special forces that were told to attack the people in Lugansk and Donetsk. This is now in the last 24 hours, and we're speaking to you on the afternoon of Friday, the 11th of April. The order was to the Alpha group of special forces, attack the occupied buildings, and now the Alpha group has mutinied. The Alpha group is no longer reliable. Ukraine's elite Alpha group reportedly refused to obey an order to besiege the protester-held buildings, and at the apparently some kind of a meeting held in Donetsk, one of the commanders of the Alpha group said that his unit is designed to rescue hostages and fight terrorism and will not act in violation of the law. And that's after the seizure of the building in Kharkov. Remember, in Kharkov, about 50 to 60 of the occupiers, pro-Russians, demanding a referendum, or at the very least, total local autonomy. On Thursday, a police lieutenant colonel gave a press conference saying that he and other local officers had been deceived by the Kiev authorities. The Kiev fascist clique told these police officers that they were going to go into the building in Kharkov and take it back from dangerous armed bandits. But in effect, no, it was a political demonstration in favor of a referendum leading towards autonomy at the least, independence more likely. And this guy, Chuikov, not Marshal Chuikov, but Andrei Chuikov, said that he will no longer obey criminal orders from the Kiev fascist clique. He resigns from office, saying that he would be fired anyway after talking to the newspapers. So this week, it's been Donetsk, Kharkov, Lugansk, some action also in Odessa, and in, as I said, Nikolaev. Now, perhaps as a result of this, we're hearing conciliatory noises from the lying fascist mouth of Yatsenyuk, the IMF butcher, right? The guy who does it all with green eye. He commits genocide with green eye shades and calculators. So the Kiev fascist clique is in big trouble. And what Yatsenyuk is saying is, we're open to all kinds of autonomy, and federalism and so forth. Unfortunately, it's a bit late for this now, and it's also impossible to believe it when it comes from a group of desperados, adventurers, fascists, anti-Semites, racists, and God knows what else. The scum of the earth. Hey, Ukraine, couldn't you do better than this gang of scum? Well, there it is. So we're not lifting a finger for these characters. Let's make it clear. The American people are anti-fascist, were anti-fascist, never allied with fascism unfortunately, until after 1945, the government did. But the population was always anti-fascist in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, never made a treaty with fascism, never recommended appeasing fascism. So the demands from these Ukrainian fascist adventurers, I urge, should fall on deaf ears. Now, we also have NATO publishing their pictures, right? The NATO characters have been making a big brouhaha in the last several days that allegedly Russia is once again massing troops on the land border of the Russian Federation to Ukraine. And today, they tried to imitate Adlai Stevenson that I talked about in previous weeks. Remember, Adlai Stevenson came into that session of the UN Security Council in October 1962 and said, look, here are the missile launchers in Cuba. Well, this time it's satellite imagery made available by NATO to the world press in the past 24 hours, and it turns out that they faked it. It's another big lie, another stunt by NATO, but they're also getting caught. Oh, my heavens. How embarrassing. The pictures that NATO shows are from 2013. They're more than 4 months old, in other words. So they refer to a situation which is not the current one, and their demand is deeply rooted in the current situation. Now, we'll talk about Ukraine constantly during the broadcast today. One of the lessons of all this is don't take any cookies from Victoria Nuland. This harpy appeared this week for congressional testimony. I think you'd want to get some kind of a report from the World Health Organization on Nuland before taking anything from her. Not Twinkies, not cookies or biscuits, as some news channels are saying. You want to stay away from Nuland, otherwise what she has may be infectious. So the question then arises about the gas, the Ukrainian gas. Well, the fact is, Ukraine, the Ukrainian SSR, Soviet Socialist Republic, was a part of the USSR. It was built up through the various Soviet 5-year plans, starting in the late 1920s. The heavy industry concentration in the Donetsk Donbass, which is one of the great coal and steel centers of the world, and still could be, and is needed, God knows. Look at Africa, look at those factories, put them together, you get something much better. The integration was total. So here we have a case of a total economic integration, which is then rent by political secessionism. And again, the political secessionism that produced Ukraine this last time around. I'm not talking 1918. I'm not talking 1941. The political secessionism was run top-down by the nomenclatura. The guy's name was Leonid Kravchuk, and he was an oligarch. And the poor Ukrainian people had very little say. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the much-touted Ukrainian version of Spetsnaz, the Alpha Group, refuses to attack in Donetsk and Lugansk, refuses the orders coming from the Kiev fascist clique. The process of disaffection gets greater and greater. They've issued calls for the mobilization of reserves, the call-up of reserves. Those have been widely ignored. The Navy refused to fight for them. The Army forces in Crimea refused to fight for them. Nobody wants to fight for them, except we have some neocons who think that Americans should fight and die for the Kiev fascist clique. And we have to differ on that one, don't we? And we've had enough of these neocons. Man, they are one-trick ponies, and they have an amazing impudence to come back after what they did to the United States, with their hands dripping with the blood of Afghanistan and Iraq especially. And now they come forward, and now they want more action. And the shop-worn slogans used by McCain. But there's a worse level, and we'll get to it in just a minute. But the gas, what does the gas show? Well, it shows that the economic viability of Ukraine was never there. In previous weeks, we've outlined that Ukraine has a very tenuous hold on political existence. The political legitimacy, if we can call it that, of Ukraine is minimal. It is a 1918 creation of the German General Staff. And I showed this through the quotes I had from Der Spiegel. You can look at this on Tarpley.net, the metaphysical doubts on the existence of the Ukrainian state, of modern Ukraine. It's a very dubious proposition politically, historically. But then, when we get to the economic basis of this viability, the situation, if anything, is even worse. And what Putin pointed out this week is that Ukraine has been the recipient of de facto gas subsidies, and even at that rate, they don't pay. So the idea is there was a political price, as I pointed out some years back. The Ukrainian position is to say, we want a political price on gas, but we want to be as abrasive, hostile, and Russophobic and threatening with NATO as possible. So we demand the right to threaten you even as you subsidize us. It's a little bit like Japan in 1941 vis-a-vis the United States. But that's another story. We'll get to that in time for the Pearl Harbor anniversary. But the action, therefore, by Putin is simply to say, look, you must pay for the gas. You're going to have to pay for it now at the world market rate. You made your decision, right? You buttered your bread. Now sleep in it. So if you're looking for the world market, you admire the market. Hey, Yatsenyuk, you're a free market man. And we had the poisonous gnome, Giftsberg. The Giftsberg Anders Astlund is still all over the place, spewing venom. His Russophobia, he's about to explode. His head is going to explode. And that's the guy who was telling Yeltsin what to do economically, this great friend of the Russian people, Anders Astlund, the great theoretician of IMF shock therapy back in 1991, 92, 93. These characters love the market. Well, they say two things. We want the free market. So now Ukraine is being offered world market prices, not subsidized prices, and they're expected to pay at the new level. And then, of course, on the inside, we've got the working out of the IMF program of genocidal austerity. We're just having the IMF spring meeting here in Washington. We've got Madame Lagarde, or Lagarde, I guess it is, Lagarde, pardon my French, but Madame Lagarde is holding press conferences and so forth. A lot of tergiversation going on there. But the idea is that the IMF wants killer austerity, and the way that's going to work is a gradual increase, we're told. It's going to be a 4-year tourniquet, and it's going to be an increase of 40% in the gas price inside the country in the first year. 40% in the first year, 40% in the second year, and then it gets easy. Then it's 20% in the third year and 20% in the fourth year. And that adds up to 120%. But notice, this is compound interest, right? This is a more than 120% cut at the end of the day, right? Compounding works going up the magic of compounding on the way down looks pretty bad. So that's going to be the gas story. So Putin essentially says, pay the world market price and pay. And since you're a deadbeat, pay up front. And I think he's also bringing home to the feckless Europeans, the Euro losers, what can we call them, who have allowed themselves to be dragged into this insanity. Merkel, what a pathetic performance. The entire economy depends on good relations with Russia, and this dumb lady, right, this absolutely impossible frump, allows Germany to be drawn in, sucked in to this destabilization of Ukraine. Nothing but losses, right? She is just hopeless, incompetent, as I hope some of these smokestack barons in the Ruhr have figured out, right? The Schlotbarone, they have to figure out that Merkel is simply impossible. I mean, she's pulled back now, but look at the costs that have already been generated. Now, in the case of Merkel, she's responding to pressure. Helmut Schmidt, I had this out on Twitter last week already, but let's stress it again here. Helmut Schmidt gave an interview, Helmut Schmidt being, of course, the former chancellor of Germany in the 70s and 80s, key guy. He's the closest thing to an elder statesman that we have in Germany. He's actually one of the few elder statesmen we have anywhere in the world, and from time to time there is some wisdom to be found here. And Helmut Schmidt said, what Putin did was perfectly understandable, and that essentially the Western policy makes no sense. So there's somebody who's been through the mill and can tell you something about the way the world actually works. Now, Merkel, after that, very quickly began with no more sanctions, enough with the sanctions, and so forth. So I think Merkel has been bopped on the bean by some of the smokestack barons and the bankers and so forth, and told to cool it, right? Back off, Merkel, or you'll be back in East Germany before you know it. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, including major article, only available, worldwide exclusive, Tarpley.net. Metaphysical doubts on the existence of Ukraine, a 1918 creation of the German General Staff. What is Ukraine worth? Well, 1 million tons of grain, 400 million eggs, 50,000 pounds of beef, hemp, manganese, and so forth at that time, right? And so this is the economic basis. And I'm told now by a very important historian that I hope to get on the program, if not this week, then next week, that Fritz Fischer, the German historian who is known for his book on Germany's grab for world power. This I disagree with, but he's got another book called the German War Aims in World War I. And, of course, he gives ample space to the German war aim being the creation of Ukraine. It was the detaching of Ukraine from the Russian Empire, and then using it as this cornucopia of grain and food. There's also the case that this area that is being fought over now, Donetsk, in 1918, when this bread peace, the food peace of February 1918 was being signed between the brand new Kiev Rada puppet state and the German General Staff, Berlin, the Germans looked and they said, I see the Ukraine border does not include Donetsk. Why don't we give you Donetsk, and then we Germans will be able to loot the coal as well as other products because we'll make Donetsk a part of Ukraine. And that's what it goes back to. How about that? So at least one of these cities, the one that's in the focus of attention right now, was added to Ukraine by planners from the German General Staff. So what we're seeing with this gas question and with this economic question in general is that Ukraine is, by and large, not viable as an economic entity separate from Russia after, 80 years, 70 years at least, of joint, totally integrated development based on the Russian-Soviet 5-year plans, the Pyatiletsky. All of that was integrating the Ukrainian economy into the larger Russian-Soviet economy. And then along comes Kravchuk, and he says, well, for me and my oligarchs to stay in power, we're going to play the Ukrainian nationalist card. And lo and behold, as Putin says, people woke up on the morning of January 1st, or whatever it was, between 91 and 92, in a new country that they hadn't heard anything about, because it was not prepared. There was not a mass movement. There was not a big idea of having, some mass liberation front demanding this stuff. So it's not viable. And on the German side, the business leaders are perfectly aware, at least they are. Maybe Merkel has she has a kind of a vague, shimmering understanding of this, that the German-Russian economic integration is also now very, very close and simply does not allow economic warfare to be brought in. So we had a German business leader this week saying, look, we are absolutely not thinking about getting fracking gas from the Marcellus Shale of Pennsylvania and getting it across the Atlantic Ocean. No, we're glad to be close to the Russian gas fields because that's a factor of safety for us. Unfortunately, you've got these Ukrainian lunatics in between, right? And that's why the U.S. has built them up. $5 billion, as Nuland said, over the last decade or two, to build up this fascist movement in Ukraine. And this morning on NPR, right, National Pentagon Radio, the Diane Rehm Show weekly review, all of these yammering scribblers were pretty much in agreement. Germany is the single biggest obstacle. Oh, we wish those Germans would be more aggressive. Now, this gets us to a simple calculation. The U.S. is pursuing what here? They're using the Kiev fascist clique as a group of provocateurs for various reasons, and it cuts against Russia, of course, but it also cuts against Europe. If you could con the Europeans using these Eastern European fanatic puppet states, right? The places where anti-Russianism is the be-all and end-all of every political debate, right? The Russophobic bloc on the eastern edge of NATO, if you could use them to con the other NATO powers, it's just a little bit like the Iraq War 11 years ago, you could, in this case, then get severe damage on the relations between Russia and the EU. But when you say EU, who's going to get hurt? Germany gets hurt the most. Italy gets hurt the second most. And then France, much, much less. The British, they think not at all, although, watch out, the commodity flows are not that great, but the financial flows are perhaps even bigger. It's essentially a U.S. con job designed to damage Europe. Remember, the whole U.S. policy since the days of Christine Romer is export the depression to Europe, wreck the euro to save the dollar and to some extent the pound. But export depression to Europe, the greater the chaos in Europe, that's maybe the only way to make the U.S. look good in comparison. Now, this theme, since I've mentioned it, it reminds us of this old debate, which I think it acquires a certain relevance here, and we're not looking for dogmatic solutions, but simply noting that this was all debated, right? We've gone through, I think, what Marx had to say about this. Marx and Engels thought that that the large historical countries, and they included Ireland and Poland after a little bit of back and forth, and above all, they wanted Germany, I guess, to be united. But they were contemptuous of places like the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Slovenes, the Serbs, Croatians, and others. And I think this is because British intelligence, which is what they were working for, British intelligence was backing Kossuth in Hungary. And the idea was to build up a greater Hungary, and in order to do that, you had to keep these South and Southeastern Slavic peoples in servitude to the Magyar landowners. So I think if you want to see why Marx and Engels don't really have a coherent policy on nationalities, it's because of this. It's because their British masters, people like David Urquhart and others, and the British Foreign Office and British Admiralty, were communicating through subtle but effective ways to Marx and Engels at the British Museum or whatever it was, that don't do anything that will rock the boat for the Hungarians. Kossuth, big British gambit at that point, and you can see that by his quasi-support of the Confederate States of America in that same interval. But then, later on, we get this debate between Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg. And Lenin says, well, we Bolsheviks have to at least affirm in principle that any nationality can have national self-determination. And Rosa Luxemburg, much more intelligent person, comes along and says, from the point of view of Poland, no, we don't want an independent Poland. That's going to be even more reactionary than Poland in the arms of the Russian Empire. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So anyway, the point of this is the whole question about some of these countries, can they be independent or not? Now, we have an independent Poland, which has held on since 1945, although, as people from Samobrona would argue, first as a Soviet protectorate, now as a U.S. protectorate. They actually said the Soviet protectorate is better. But the question then of Ukraine would be this. Luxemburg wrote in her doctoral thesis, The Industrial Development of Poland, she said essentially, look, Poland is simply the most heavily industrialized part of the Russian empire, and we're going to have a much better chance with the larger framework than we would, say, here in Poland alone. And in any case, the economic integration is so thorough that an independent Poland would have tremendous problems. Now, part of this has to do with what she was thinking of as the likely confines of Poland, right? The Poland that emerged in the 1920s may be somewhat bigger than what she thought, and therefore somewhat more viable. But I think what we've got today is an example of this. In other words, what Luxemburg says in her thesis, The Industrial Development of Poland, I think it does apply to Ukraine today, that it is simply economically not feasible to have this as a separate country unless you're in a very close customs union, say, with Moscow and, of course, with Minsk, Smolensk, with Belarus. So that is the problem that emerges. And Helmut Schmidt is right. What Russia did was completely understandable. And we even have Steven Seagal, the American actor, who says pretty much the same thing. Now, in terms of how do you respond to this? Fracking is a dead end. Fracking, according to some things that I've been looking at, doesn't last that long. You essentially you bet your chips, place your bet on fracking. You're going to be okay for a few years, but at the end of that, you're going to be stuck with an exhausted, low-technology, backward-looking, obsolete energy economy. That is not the answer. Whether you like it or not, the answer is nuclear today, thermonuclear tomorrow. And if you want to, obviously put the emphasis on the ITER that is now being built in the south of France, the thermonuclear fusion power.